On November 18, 1942, over Henderson Field at Guadalcanal, a Japanese Zero pilot clenched his control stick as he watched strange American twin-boom fighters climb from the runway with startling speed. That day, the 339th Fighter Squadron became the first group of Lightning pilots to engage Japanese aircraft, marking a turning point that challenged Japan's long-held dominance in the air. Later, the shaken pilot would tell his commander at Rabaul, "Twin engines, twin tails, climbing beyond anything we've faced," words that exposed the first cracks in 3 years of Japanese air confidence. What he saw through his canopy contradicted everything Japanese naval doctrine had taught. The American P-38 Lightning, an aircraft dismissed by Japanese intelligence as heavy and awkward, rose from sea level to fighting altitude faster than his Mitsubishi Zero could match. In China, the Philippines, and over Pearl Harbor, the Zero had ruled unchallenged. No Allied plane could rival its climb rate or agility. Yet now, over this blood-soaked island, American pilots in twin-engined fighters seized control of the battle from heights the Zero could barely reach. The P-38s of the 339th Squadron downed 3 Japanese planes in this first fight, striking from altitudes that nullified the Zero's famous turning advantage. The rules of air combat were being rewritten, not in training manuals, but in the hard truth of superior altitude performance that shattered illusions of Japanese invincibility. Confidence under the rising sun faltered. The decline of Japanese air supremacy had begun before that November day, though few in the Imperial Navy would have admitted it. Since December 7, 1941, Japanese aviators had swept across the Pacific with an aura of unstoppable power. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero, with its long range, tight turns, and expert pilots, built a terrifying reputation. Its 332 miles per hour top speed at altitude looked formidable, and its ability to outturn Allied planes made it deadly in close dogfights. Among its aces was Petty Officer First Class Saburo Sakai, veteran of China and credited with many victories, who by 1942 had tallied 13 kills in the Borneo campaign before being transferred to New Guinea, where he scored the bulk of his eventual 64 claims. His confidence, like that of his peers, was unshakable. His superior, Lieutenant Junichi Sasai, assured the pilots that the American planes over Guadalcanal were simply carrier-based F-4F Wildcats, opponents they had bested before. Early 1942 seemed to confirm that belief. Japanese fighters shredded Brewster Buffaloes over Singapore, crushed P-40 Warhawks in Java, and scattered British Hurricanes in Burma. The Zero held near total dominance in the Pacific. Even when newer Allied planes appeared, Japanese flyers clung to their edge through superior training and combat experience gained in China. Still, by mid-1942, intelligence reports hinted at a new American design, a fighter with twin engines, twin tails, and concentrated nose firepower. Most commanders dismissed the warnings. How could a bulky twin-engine machine threaten the agile Zero? Japanese doctrine, built on decisive battles and individual skill, had no concept for what was about to arrive. The P-38 Lightning emerged as the only truly successful twin-engine daytime fighter of the war. The P-38 was born from Lockheed's response to a February 1937 U.S. Army Air Corps request for a long-range interceptor. Clarence Kelly Johnson and his design team built something the world had never seen before, a fighter that could top 400 miles per hour, climb to 40,000 feet, and fly missions stretching over 1,000 miles. Powered by 2 Allison V1710 engines, each producing 1,150 horsepower with turbo superchargers, the Lightning had performance numbers that Japanese engineers could hardly believe. Where the Zero was crafted for agility at the cost of armor and even self-sealing fuel tanks, the Lightning followed an entirely different philosophy, prioritizing speed, altitude, firepower, and pilot survival. When the first P-38s showed up in the Pacific, their arrival wasn't greeted with celebration, but with frustration over mechanical issues. Early models in Australia revealed design flaws that delayed their combat debut. Yet by the end of 1942, those problems were being ironed out, and veteran P-40 pilots were transitioning into the Lightning's cockpits. The 49th Fighter Group still flew P-40s at the time, but a shift to P-38s was on the horizon. These men carried with them hard-won lessons from facing Japanese fighters, They knew never to let a Zero drag them into a turning fight. The P-38 gave them a weapon that let them fight on their own terms. The Lightning's first real test came on November 18, 1942, when the 339th Fighter Squadron, operating from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, escorted B-17 flying fortresses and clashed head-on with Japanese aircraft. The encounter shocked both sides. Escorting Japanese pilots first noticed the strange twin-boom shapes climbing fast from the south, unsure if they were bombers or reconnaissance planes. But their rapid climb didn't fit either role, and by the time they realized these were fighters, the P-38s already held a 5,000-foot altitude advantage. Once there, the Lightnings cruised above the Zero's effective ceiling, using their superior speed at height to position themselves perfectly before diving down with crushing attacks. The contrast was brutal. The Zero was a legend in low-speed turning battles, but at high speeds it was a different story. Its controls stiffened badly above 250 miles per hour, and past 300 it became nearly unmanageable. Later, P-38 models, with hydraulically boosted controls, kept maneuverability even in dives nearing 500 miles per hour. The gap in technology was undeniable. The Lightning didn't just outperform on paper, it represented an entirely new way of thinking about air combat, one the Japanese had never prepared for. Its nose-mounted weapons, 4.50 caliber machine guns, and a 20mm cannon, poured all their firepower straight ahead, eliminating the guesswork of wing-mounted gun convergence. The turbo superchargers added another dimension of superiority, keeping power high at altitudes where Japanese planes wheezed, while also muffling exhaust so effectively that Lightnings often struck before their targets even knew they were there. The Zero's Nakajima Sakai engine put out 950 horsepower at sea level, but by 20,000 feet it dropped to about 750, leaving the fighter gasping where the P-38 still surged. By early 1943, the psychological weight of that difference was showing. Squadron reports and letters home from Japanese pilots revealed shaken confidence as they faced a machine that broke every assumption they had carried into the war. The myth of the Zero's invulnerability, carefully nurtured since its debut in China, was beginning to collapse. Japanese pilots described constant unease, aware that a P-38 could appear out of nowhere to strike. Lieutenant Commander Tadashi Nakajima learned firsthand what would become a classic two-on-one maneuver. Two Wildcats attacked his plane. He quickly moved onto the tail of one, but before he could fire, the second came in hard from the side. Furious, Nakajima returned to Rabaul Shaken, having been forced to dive and flee for safety. Yet even this unnerving fight against Wildcats would pale compared to what the Lightning would unleash. Saburo Sakai himself later admitted that Zero pilots could no longer reliably engage P-38s, except under rare circumstances that almost never presented themselves. Coming from Japan's most celebrated ace, that statement hit the pilot community like a hammer. The tactical picture was darker still. The Lightning's enormous range meant it could appear anywhere across the Pacific. With drop tanks extending its reach to 1,600 miles, the P-38 could escort bombers deep into Japanese territory or roam far from its own bases on offensive sweeps. Japanese pilots could no longer rely on having superior numbers even above their own islands. Nothing proved the Lightning's dominance more dramatically than Operation Vengeance on April 18, 1943. 16 P-38s flew an audacious 435-mile interception mission to ambush Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. The plan demanded flawless navigation over open ocean, extreme endurance, and the ability to handle both bombers and their fighter escorts. Major John Mitchell led the flight, skimming just 50 feet above the waves to evade radar before climbing to strike at the exact moment. The psychological blow was immense. Yamamoto, the most respected figure in the Japanese Navy, was shot down despite 6 Zeros guarding him. Escort pilot Kenji Yanaga, who witnessed the attack, later described the shock. The Lightnings had materialized seemingly from nowhere, executed with surgical precision, and withdrawn before the Zeros could react. The Americans had timed their interception to the minute, striking when Yamamoto's group was descending to land. That combination of meticulous planning and the P-38's reach showed a level of coordination Japan could not match. As 1943 advanced, American flyers sharpened their tactics to fully exploit the Lightning's strengths. The boom and zoom approach, Diving from altitude, firing, then climbing back to safety became routine, and Japanese fighters had no reliable answer. The first clash between Zeros and P-38s ended with 15 Japanese planes destroyed for the loss of a single Lightning. Such lopsided outcomes became increasingly common as US pilots grew familiar with their aircraft. The Japanese experimented with countermeasures, using dive brakes to force overshoots, trying to draw P-38s into turning duels at low level, even flying looser formations to improve visibility. None of it worked consistently. The performance gulf was simply too wide. Behind this battlefield reality lay a larger truth: America's unmatched industrial capacity. By war's end, more than 10,000 Lightnings would roll off the line in 18 different versions, each refined through combat lessons. The P-38J, introduced in late 1943, featured hydraulically boosted ailerons for faster roll, fixes for cockpit heating that plagued European operations, and upgraded turbo superchargers that gave it even greater high-altitude power. Japanese aircraft designers, meanwhile, struggled to make only small tweaks to the aging Zero. Captain Minoru Genda, the strategist behind Pearl Harbor, admitted to colleagues in mid-1943, "We are not just facing a better fighter, we are facing a system of constant improvement that we cannot keep up with. Every new American plane we meet outclasses the last." The widening gap wasn't just technical, it was also about pilots. By the middle of 1943, Japan was losing veteran aviators faster than they could be replaced, and the shortfall in both material and skill was becoming impossible to ignore. Training cycles shrank from 2 years to less than 6 months, sending young men into combat with under 200 hours of flight time. By contrast, American pilots often logged 400 to 600 hours before entering combat, with extensive practice in tactics, analysis of gun camera footage, and training across multiple aircraft types. When they transitioned to the P-38, they received specialized instruction in twin-engine handling and high-altitude combat, giving them yet another edge. The Lightning's mechanical design itself offered survival advantages the Japanese couldn't match. With 2 engines, even badly damaged P-38s often limped home on one, giving pilots confidence they could survive long missions. Japanese pilots flying single-engine Zeros over endless ocean had no such margin for error. An engine failure meant either burning up in the sky or ditching into shark-filled waters. By late 1943, Japanese intelligence was openly warning its pilots to avoid fighting Lightnings whenever possible, citing their incredible diving speed, accurate concentrated fire, and ability to appear unexpectedly. One captured report from December 1943 grimly admitted, "The P-38 must be regarded as the most dangerous American fighter in the Pacific. Its speed and climb rate surpass our capabilities. Combat should be avoided unless in overwhelming numbers and with a positional advantage." For Japanese pilots trained in a warrior culture that glorified seeking combat, being ordered to flee was devastating to morale. Proof of the Lightning's dominance came through the rise of American aces. Major Richard Bong became the highest-scoring U.S. ace with 40 kills, all in P-38s, while Major Thomas Maguire tallied 38 before his death in early 1945. These records, achieved in less than 2 years, outstripped what most Japanese aces had managed over several years of war. Altogether, P-38s destroyed over 1,800 Japanese aircraft in the Pacific, draining not just machines, but the irreplaceable experienced pilots flying them. Each loss accelerated the decline of Japan's air power, as undertrained recruits struggled to fill the gaps. Meanwhile, American engineers kept pushing forward. By 1944, the P-38L introduced stronger engines with better high-altitude performance, improved cooling systems, and rocket launchers for ground attack. These Lightnings could now haul serious bomb loads alongside their standard guns, shifting easily from fighter roles to ground strike missions. For Japanese airmen, watching the Lightning evolve from a deadly interceptor into a versatile weapons platform was staggering. They were facing not just a superior plane, but a flexible system of warfare they could not replicate. Beyond the machines themselves, the deepest shock came from the cultural divide. Japanese pilots, raised on ideas of honor and individual dogfights, struggled to grasp the American focus on adaptation, teamwork, and relentless innovation. The Japanese had long treated aerial combat as an art form, built on individual skill and the spirit of the warrior. The Americans approached it differently, treating air combat as an engineering problem, solved with technology, training, and tactics. Commander Masatake Okumiya, reviewing battle reports, later wrote, "After the war, we could not accept that fighting spirit alone was not enough. Every account of P-38 superiority was answered with demands for more courage, more aggression. We mistook bravery for capability. That blindness kept us from adapting effectively. While American pilots refined their tactics after every mission, Japanese training stayed focused on aerobatics and individual duels, skills that meant little against an enemy that refused to play by those rules." By mid-1944, the gap widened further with the arrival of airborne radar in some P-38s, enabling night interception. Darkness had once shielded Japanese operations, but now even night skies offered no safety. The consequences of this attrition showed clearly in June 1944 during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, remembered as the Marianas Turkey Shoot. The P-38 itself didn't take part, but its earlier grinding effect was clear. By then, years of fighting against Lightnings and other U.S. fighters had cost Japan its most experienced pilots, leaving green recruits to face the Navy's Hellcats. The result was over 300 Japanese aircraft lost for minimal American casualties. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, leading Japan's carriers, admitted afterward, "Our pilots were not ready. They lacked both the experience and the planes to stand against the Americans. The air war was already lost before that day." By late 1944 and into 1945, Japan's efforts to counter the Lightning turned desperate. They tried ramming attacks, knowing dogfights were hopeless. They developed phosphorus anti-aircraft shells to ignite P-38 fuel tanks. They even attempted to field twin-engine fighters of their own, but none reached meaningful numbers. The Kawasaki Ki-102, intended to rival the P-38, entered service in 1945, 4 years too late, and only 238 were built. It was slower, climbed poorly, and constantly suffered engine failures. By early 1945, Japanese pilots no longer spoke of superiority, or even parity. They spoke of survival. The P-38, together with other American fighters, had achieved total control of Japan's skies. Saburo Sakai later admitted that the Lightning crushed the morale of Zero pilots. The numbers tell the story. More than 1,800 Japanese aircraft destroyed by P-38s. Major Richard Bong with 40 victories, all in Lightnings. Major Thomas Maguire with 38. The P-38 destroyed more Japanese aircraft than any other U.S. Army fighter. Against that, Japan's losses were catastrophic. By the end of the war, over 90% of the veteran pilots who had started the conflict were gone. The average Japanese flyer in 1945 had less than 100 hours of training, barely enough to keep the plane in the air, much less face an enemy they couldn't outfly or outfight. After the war, American occupation forces interviewed surviving Japanese officers and pilots, uncovering the full psychological toll. Commander Okumiya admitted, "The P-38 completely broke our confidence. We believed in our superiority, in our training, in our aircraft. The Lightning proved we were wrong in all of it. It wasn't just faster or better armed, it represented a way of fighting we couldn't match." Another pilot recalled, "The first time I met a P-38, I was shocked. I found an American plane that could outrun, outclimb, and outdive the Zero, which we had believed to be the best fighter in the world." Post-war technical studies stripped away the last illusions and laid bare the scale of the mismatch. The Mitsubishi A6M0, once considered the pinnacle of aerial design, had hard limits. Its top speed barely touched 332 miles per hour at its critical altitude, and its service ceiling of 33,000 feet looked impressive on paper, yet the aircraft struggled badly above 25,000 feet, where engine power fell off. Its climb rate of 3,100 feet per minute plummeted quickly with altitude, robbing the Zero of its supposed vertical advantage. The range, 1,930 miles, was extraordinary for its day, but it came at terrible cost. No armor for the pilot, no self-sealing tanks in early versions, and even later models carried only minimal protection. Its armament of two 7.7mm machine guns and two 20mm cannon was effective early on, but ammunition reserves were limited and accuracy depended on dangerous close-range duels. In contrast, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning pushed the performance envelope far beyond Japanese expectations. The L model topped 400 miles per hour, climbed at 4,750 feet per minute at sea level, and soared to altitudes above 44,000 feet. With drop tanks, it could strike targets 1,600 miles away, escorting bombers or hunting deep into enemy skies. Armament concentrated in the nose, 4.50 caliber machine guns, and a 20mm cannon delivered devastating fire without the convergence issues of wing-mounted guns. Armor protection and self-sealing tanks came standard, giving pilots confidence their machines could take punishment and keep fighting. The statistics revealed not just a gap, but a complete transformation of air combat. The Zero was a weapon for a different era, designed around pilot skill and maneuverability, while the P-38 embodied the age of industrial war, where mass production, technology, and constant refinement determined victory. That industrial context proved decisive. Lockheed built more than 10,000 P-38s during the war, each one a product of assembly line efficiency and engineering precision. Japan produced roughly the same number of Zeros, but over a longer span, and with declining quality as resources dwindled. American factories, drawing on lessons from automobile mass production, churned out aircraft faster than Japan could train replacements. Each Lightning was a marvel of coordination, with thousands of specialized parts manufactured to tight tolerances across an industrial network Japan simply could not match. The Allison engines powering the P-38 showcased America's technological edge. Superchargers, high-grade metallurgy, and standardized production created engines that were not only powerful, but interchangeable, streamlining repairs in the field. Japanese engines, by contrast, often required extensive hand-fitting and constant adjustment, making large-scale maintenance and reliability a nightmare. The disparity in training magnified the imbalance. By 1944, P-38 pilots underwent extensive twin-engine instruction, logging over 100 hours on trainers before even climbing into a Lightning. They learned engine-out procedures, asymmetric thrust handling, oxygen system management for high altitude, and practiced gunnery relentlessly with camera guns and towed targets. Formation flying, teamwork, escape training, and deep systems knowledge turned them into professional warfighters. Japanese training at the same time had collapsed to the bare minimum. New recruits received 50 to 100 hours of basic flying, little combat instruction, and barely any live fire practice due to ammunition shortages. Few understood high-altitude combat, and much of the curriculum emphasized spirit and sacrifice over tactical skill, with many trainees prepared directly for kamikaze missions. The contrast was stark. American pilots entered combat as polished professionals, while Japanese pilots often arrived as underprepared sacrifices. The Lightning also forced tactical evolution that reshaped the air war. Traditional turning duels, the core of dogfighting since World War I, became obsolete. Below 200 miles per hour, the Zero could still outturn a P-38, but the Lightning's speed, climb, and dive gave it control of the engagement. American pilots mastered energy tactics, diving from above in boom and zoom strikes, shredding formations, then climbing back to altitude before Japanese pilots could respond. This approach, only possible with superior performance, made Japanese defensive tactics irrelevant. Efforts to counter with layered formations or cloud cover fell apart. P-38s had the speed and reach to sweep entire skies clean. The psychological impact was just as important as the technical one. The P-38's twin-boom silhouette looked bizarre to Japanese eyes, who initially wrote it off as clumsy. Yet as the Lightning racked up victories, its outline itself became a symbol of dread. Pilots reported unease at the mere sight of its approach, knowing it represented not just another opponent, but an entire system of warfare that outclassed them at every level. The P-38 had become more than an aircraft. It was a flying embodiment of America's industrial and tactical superiority, a reminder in aluminum and firepower that the days of Zero dominance were over. Ground crews reported that even the rumor of P-38 patrols was enough to disrupt Japanese operations. Pilots delayed takeoffs, altered flight plans, or demanded additional escorts before daring to fly into contested skies. Among Japanese aviators, the Lightning earned the uneasy nickname, "two planes, one pilot," a phrase that reflected their initial confusion over its twin-boom design, but also a grudging respect for its unmatched performance. The aircraft's psychological presence extended far beyond the battlefield. It was reshaping strategy itself. The strategic impact of the P-38 was profound. Japanese military doctrine had been built on the assumption of near parity in the air, with the belief that their warrior spirit and superior fighting ethos would tip the balance. The Lightning shattered this illusion. Its sheer technical superiority proved that courage and willpower were useless against overwhelming speed, firepower, and endurance. Faced with this reality, Japanese commanders began shifting strategies in desperation. Kamikaze missions were accelerated because conventional air combat had become hopeless. Experienced pilots were pulled back to defend the home islands, while offensive air operations were largely abandoned by mid-1944. Resources were poured into so-called wonder weapons, from rocket planes to suicide craft, reflecting a recognition that the war could not be won by conventional means. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, admitted privately in October 1944, "We no longer have an air force capable of conventional operations. The American fighters, especially the P-38, have eliminated our ability to contest the skies." The Lightning also revealed America's dominance in maintenance and logistics. At first, the aircraft's twin-engine design worried planners, who feared it might prove too complex for rough Pacific conditions. Instead, it became another American advantage. P-38 squadrons maintained operational readiness rates of over 80%, even from makeshift island airstrips. By contrast, Japanese units flying simpler single-engine Zeros were often lucky to keep 50% of their planes airworthy by 1944. U.S. ground crews, many drawn from civilian aviation or automobile industries, brought a professional, systematic approach to repairs, developing specialized tools, standardized procedures, and preventive schedules that kept Lightnings flying. Japanese maintenance, rooted in traditional reliance on individual craftsmanship, simply could not keep pace with the demands of a grinding modern war. Navigation technology added yet another layer of superiority. Equipped with radio direction-finding gear, P-38s could traverse the vast Pacific with remarkable accuracy, homing in on beacons, locating bases in poor weather, and hitting targets at precisely planned times. Japanese pilots, still dependent on dead reckoning and visual cues, found themselves limited in range, flexibility, and confidence. The legendary Yamamoto interception mission was only possible because of this advanced navigation capability. The 435-mile over-water flight required exact timing and precision that Japanese technology could not have achieved. The impact on Japanese naval aviation was catastrophic. The Imperial Navy had built its entire doctrine on carrier-based air power, but P-38 dominance in island campaigns decimated rebuilt air groups that had only recently recovered from Midway's losses. By 1944, Japanese carriers often sailed with barely half-strength squadrons of poorly trained recruits. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, preparing for the Battle of the Philippine Sea, grimly confessed, "Our pilots are not ready for combat against American fighters. They can barely land on carriers, much less fight P-38s and Hellcats. We are sending them to certain death." This clash forced a cultural reckoning within Japan. The Bushido Code, which exalted spiritual strength and the lone warrior's valor, collapsed under the weight of industrial-age air combat. Younger officers began quietly questioning doctrines that had guided Japanese military policy for decades. Returning pilots, those few who survived engagements with P-38s, spoke of American aircraft that were faster, tougher, and more capable in every respect. These stories contradicted years of propaganda about Japanese superiority and Western weakness, seeding doubt even in the broader civilian population. The economic reality sealed the matter. A P-38 cost roughly $97,000 in 1944, a staggering sum by Japanese standards, yet the United States built thousands of them without pause. Japan, by contrast, struggled to produce aircraft at a fraction of the cost in numbers that could make a difference. America's wealth and industrial coordination ensured that Lightning squadrons never lacked replacements, while Japan's factories, starved of resources and bombed relentlessly, fell further behind each month. The P-38 was not just a machine, it was the embodiment of an industrial system Japan could never match. and its presence in the Pacific skies signaled the end of Japanese air power as a serious force. By 1944, the amount of aluminum required to build a single P-38 exceeded what many Japanese aircraft factories received in an entire month. Each Lightning represented not just raw materials, but also an ecosystem of precision instruments, advanced turbo superchargers, constant speed propellers, and countless other components that demanded industrial capabilities Japan had never developed. The gulf was staggering, and nowhere was it more clearly expressed than in the testimony of Japanese pilots themselves. These men, conditioned never to admit weakness, nonetheless spoke candidly after the war about the Lightning's superiority. Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, Japan's most famous surviving ace, described the P-38's tactics with a mix of frustration and respect. The Lightnings would patrol at altitudes the Zero couldn't reach, their great speed allowing them to maneuver into the most favorable positions. From there, the American fighters would dive down like hawks, striking helpless Zeros before climbing back to safety. For pilots trained to rely on close-in maneuverability, there was no answer to such overwhelming dominance. Perhaps the greatest humiliation came not in dogfights, but in the Lightning's secondary role. The P-38's reconnaissance variants, especially the F-5, accounted for an astonishing 90% of aerial photography in the Pacific. These unarmed versions, stripped for speed but retaining full performance, flew over Japanese positions with impunity, mapping defenses, troop movements, and supply routes. Fighters scrambled to intercept them, rarely succeeded. The Lightnings simply flew too high, too fast. Japanese commanders came to understand that every movement, every deployment, every attempt at concealment was being photographed and analyzed by the very aircraft that had already shattered them in combat. The legacy of that shock outlived the war. For many Japanese pilots, facing the P-38 became a lesson that transformed their views on technology and tradition. The Bushido Code had taught them to trust courage and spirit, but the Lightning proved such values meaningless without matching capability. After the war, many survivors became advocates for Japan's embrace of technology and industrial advancement. Saburo Sakai himself, who later became a successful businessman, often repeated the lesson. The Lightning taught us we must never again fall behind technologically. It showed us that industrial power, not warrior spirit, determines victory in modern war. The P-38's rapid evolution during the conflict underscored America's advantage in technical innovation. Each problem encountered in combat was swiftly addressed in new production runs. Compressibility issues at high speeds brought about dive flaps. Cold cockpits were fixed with improved heating systems. Concerns over roll rate led to hydraulically boosted ailerons. Japanese designers, trapped by limited resources and rigid doctrine, simply could not keep pace. The Zero flying in 1945 was little more than the same machine that had struck Pearl Harbor in 1941, with only minor tweaks. The P-38 of 1945, by contrast, bore little resemblance to its early war counterpart. It was vastly more powerful, better armed, and far more adaptable. General George Kenney, commander of Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific, summarized it. Bluntly, the P-38 pilots flying at great height chose when and where they wanted to fight, with disastrous results for Japanese pilots. That ability to dictate the terms of engagement, choosing the battlefield, the timing, and the altitude, represented a revolution in air combat that Japanese doctrine never countered. The statistics spoke for themselves. By the end of the war, America's top two aces, Richard Bong and Thomas Maguire, had downed 78 Japanese aircraft between them, all in P-38s. Japan's top surviving ace, by comparison, had 64 victories accumulated slowly over 6 long years of combat. The mathematics of attrition were hopeless for Japan, as each loss drained not just planes, but irreplaceable expertise. In the end, the P-38's dominance symbolized far more than one aircraft's superiority over another. It embodied the fundamental contrasts between two nations' approaches to war. America's reliance on industrial capacity, innovation, and long-term strategy versus Japan's faith in spirit, tradition, and short, decisive clashes. The shock Japanese pilots felt when they first faced the P-38 was not just fear of a faster, stronger enemy fighter. It was the deeper realization that they were confronting modernity itself, an industrial way of war they could neither match nor escape. The Lightning represented the cold, systematic application of science, engineering, and industrial organization to the art of war. Against that machine-like efficiency, the samurai tradition, no matter how noble or brave, proved powerless. Behind the charts of performance and long lists of specifications lay a far more human reality. Thousands of young Japanese pilots, many with fewer than 100 hours of flying time, were ordered into obsolete aircraft and sent to face P-38 squadrons. They went aloft, knowing the odds were hopeless. Letters discovered after the war reveal the quiet despair behind their outward obedience. One young pilot wrote to his mother before his final mission, "Tomorrow I will face the twin-tailed devils. I do not expect to return. They climb higher and fly faster than anything we know. I will do my duty, but I know it is hopeless." He was shot down over Rabaul by P-38s in March 1944, another name on a long list of young men sacrificed to a technological gulf that bravery alone could not bridge. His story was just one of thousands, each a reminder that courage without capability becomes tragedy. The Lightning's influence did not end with the war. Its lessons shaped the Cold War, with both the United States and the Soviet Union investing in twin-engine high-altitude interceptors inspired by what the P-38 had achieved. For America, the aircraft reinforced a doctrine that placed overwhelming reliance on technology, industry, and systematic innovation as the guarantors of battlefield dominance. For Japan, the trauma of being outclassed by industrial power left deep scars. In the post-war decades, the newly formed self-defense forces emphasized quality over quantity, technological sophistication over mass mobilization, a philosophy born from the memory of facing the Lightning with inadequate machines and undertrained pilots. The end of an era was written in the skies of the Pacific. When Japanese pilots realized they could neither outrun nor outclimb the P-38 Lightning, it marked the death of the age of the lone warrior ace. The world of dogfights determined by aerobatics and personal courage gave way to industrial-age combat dictated by speed, altitude, firepower, and logistics. Saburo Sakai, who survived to see peace, summed up the truth with painful clarity. The P-38 destroyed the morale of the Zero pilot. It wasn't only faster, tougher, or better armed. It symbolized an entirely new way of war, one Japan could never match. The men who returned alive carried with them a harsh truth. In modern war, courage without technology is not heroism, but futility. The Lightning didn't simply destroy Japanese aircraft, it demolished an entire worldview. The Zero, invincible in 1941, was already obsolete by 1943. Pilots who had trained for years in tight-turning aerobatics found their skills irrelevant against an enemy who fought on different terms. The twin-tailed devil that haunted their nightmares stood not only as a fearsome machine, but also as a symbol of American industrial might and technological innovation. It was the embodiment of an approach to warfare that would dominate the rest of the 20th century. The last word fittingly belongs to Saburo Sakai, Japan's most celebrated surviving ace. Looking back, he admitted, "The P-38 taught us the hardest lesson of all, that the age of the samurai was over. In the skies over the Pacific, we met the future, and it destroyed us." The shock of that realization has echoed through history, a lasting reminder that in war, technology and industrial power ultimately triumph over tradition and valor. Those Japanese pilots who could not escape the Lightning paid the price with their lives, their machines, and the final collapse of their nation's imperial ambitions. They had challenged the arsenal of democracy with the spirit of the samurai. And the P-38 Lightning answered with 400 miles per hour of devastating precision from 30,000 feet, proving beyond doubt that courage alone could never win an industrial war. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching. 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 You are watching.